State versus Keith Sandy, CR 2015-104. State versus Dominique Perez, CR 2015-105. Entries, please.
Good morning, Your Honor. Hope you had a nice rest. Randy McGinn, Alicia Montoya, and Mike Sievers on behalf of the state of New Mexico.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Sam Bregman, Monica Garcia on behalf of Keith Sandy is here.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Luis Robles, Nick Audio, David Roman on behalf of Dominique Perez, who's in the courtroom today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. I understand that you don't need the Skype technology this morning. You're going to do that tomorrow?
Correct.
And we're going to meet it tomorrow.
Okay. Have you talked to purchasing about that?
Talking to who?
Purchasing?
Purchasing? I think my office is in the process of talking through the people who need to be.
Okay.
And can we know?
I spoke with your bailiff, so.
Can we know who the Skype technology is going to be used through?
For who? What person? What witness? Mr. Toya?
Is that what was anticipated?
That's not the person they asked last week. They asked for.
No, that was, you're right. Now that that was one of Mr. Robles' witnesses, was for today. But I'm going to need it because we've gone so long. Mr. Toya is no longer, he is in mandatory training for a week in Las Cruces. And that's why I'm asking to have Mr. Toya be able to testify by Skype.
All right, let me have the two of you, or three of you, discuss that during a recess, and let me know if there's an issue.
Okay.
Is everyone ready for the jury?
Judge, I just had one sort of housekeeping matter. We checked all of the exhibits to see what had formally been admitted and what had not, and so I have a series of exhibits that have been used but not formally admitted. And I just wanted to...
Of the state?
Yes, Your Honor. And so I just wanted to take care of that
Sure.
this morning. So 11A and 11B are the transcripts that opposing counsel stipulated to. That's that we didn't bring Jennifer Bean in for, the transcript of Weimer-Skirch's tape and the transcript of the same time period for Dom Perez's helmet cam. That's 11A and 11B, and they just have not been formally admitted, although they were stipulated to. And then 9E.
Wait, before you move on
Okay.
to 11A and B, Mr. Robles,
Yes.
you agree that they were stipulated to into their admission?
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
The next one, Judge, is 9E, 2 through 12. These are the video stills from the Perez helmet cam that I think have been used but not formally admitted. I think some of them were admitted, but some were not. So,
Any objection to 9E, 1 through 12?
I think it's 2 through 12. I think, Judge, I think one is formally admitted, but
All right, so I have 1 through 27.
and I think 22 is all we want to go through.
So 1 through 22. Any objection?
No.
We don't need it.
And then there were two video clips that were used with Mr. Thixton on cross-examination, which are 13D1 and 13D2, that I don't think were formally admitted.
What are they? I mean, they're used with on cross, but what are they specifically?
There were those video clips of Mr. Sandy going into position and Mr. Boyd sitting down.
Those were the two, right?
But who's, is it Mr. Dixon's video?
Yes.
Any opposition to 13D, 1 and 2?
If you look into the,
Aye.
okay. Sorry, man, I can't be like Mr. Bregman. I should buy hearing aids. So it's hard, and I have to admit that. But if you're asking, should they be admitted, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
If that's what you ask, I just simply can't hear.
I'll repeat myself. 13D, 1 and 2 have been offered by the state for admission?
No.
Okay.
No objection.
And then the last one, Judge, is Exhibit 16, which I think is just the blank blow-up of the hillside that we used but did not formally admit. We have the blow-up with the names on it, but we don't have the blank blow-up of the hillside.
So is it 16, is there an A and a B?
I think you may be right, Judge. I'm going to look and see what that is. Actually, this one is showing
not an A or a B.
Okay, any objections?
What's the number?
16?
16
Yeah, we put 16A.
A?
Yeah, but it was already admitted.
It's just 16.
Well, if it's
Is it
16,
the wide view?
Yes, white view. Yeah.
that's 16A then.
It's marked as 16, there was no B that was offered.
That's
If
correct,
you want
yes.
to change the chart, there's
So
just
just
16,
16.
and it's the wide view.
Okay. That's, that,
No objection?
No objection.
no objection, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge.
Have defendants done the same with their exhibits?
I haven't.
Okay. So then, is everyone ready for the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can I turn that away, the pictures away now?
Sure. I need to move them back. And then, who is the next witness?
Daniel Cafferty. Would you like me to bring in the witness?
Sure.
And Your Honor, when you have a moment, if you could switch it to prosecution table, just so I can get that going before the jury comes in.
Okay.
Thank you.
By the way, for the record, we didn't pull that out there.
Okay. Let's wait for the witness to come in. All right, you come on. Ms. McGinley, do you have your amended proposed jury instruction?
Good morning.
The jury's going to come in, we're all going to stay on, and when I say be seated, you and I will.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, you may be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth under penalty of law?
I do, Your Honor.
Thank you, you may be seated.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please state your name for the record and spell it as well.
My name is Daniel Cafferty, and the spelling of my last name is C-A-F-F-E-R-K-E-Y.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Cafferty.
Good morning, sir.
Now, to set the stage, I understand that in 2007, you were the lieutenant in charge of the Albuquerque Police Department Training Academy. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's the year that Officer Dominic Perez was a cadet at the Albuquerque Police Department Academy.
I believe it was 2006, the 94th cadet class.
All right, so I apologize for that
Okay.
mistake on my part.
Yes, sir.
But before we reach that part of your career, I'd like to give a jury an opportunity to understand a little bit about your background in law enforcement. What was your first position at the Albuquerque Police Department?
I was hired in 1990 as a police service aide, which is a civilian job. You probably see them driving around town in the white cars and the amber lights, giving parking tickets type of things.
Now, when did you attend the Albuquerque Police Department Academy?
That was in 1992, and I graduated in 1993 from the 67th cadet class.
How many years did you work as an officer?
As an officer, my total time on the department was 21 and a half years, and I was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 2003, so it was 10 years as an officer.
And I understand during those 10 years you served as a SWAT team member, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And how many years did you serve as a SWAT team?
I was on the SWAT team for 4 years. 2 of those years I was on the entry team, and 2 of those years I was a sniper.
Now, what year were you promoted to sergeant again?
That was 2003,
And how many years did you serve as a sergeant for the Albuquerque Police Department?
approximately 3 years.
And there came a time when you were promoted to lieutenant, is that correct?
That is correct.
When was that?
Approximately 2006.
Now, how many years did you work and serve as a lieutenant?
I was a lieutenant for approximately 3 years.
Now, during your time and tenure as a lieutenant, there came a time when you were assigned to the Albuquerque Police Department Academy, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, what was the title of your role when you were in charge of the Albuquerque Police Department Academy?
My role as the rank of lieutenant was the director of training.
Now, there came a point in time after serving as lieutenant, you were promoted, is that right?
That is correct.
What rank were you promoted to?
I was promoted to the rank of commander.
And what is a commander in the rank structure of the Albuquerque Police Department?
So there would be 2 ranks above the rank of commander. That would be deputy chief and then chief of police.
Now, how many years did you work as commander?
I was a commander for almost 3 years.
Now, what assignments or positions did you hold while you were the commander, a commander at the Albuquerque Police Department?
So I was promoted out of the police academy, although I stayed there at the rank of commander for some time. Then I spent my last 2 years as the commander of the Special Operations Division. And the Special Operations Division on the Albuquerque Police Department, we're in charge of SWAT, K-9, bombs, horses, Metro Court Security, Prisoner Transport Unit, and that's what I did. Upon retirement, I held that position.
Now, let's turn your attention back to the Albuquerque Police Academy and your work there as lieutenant. How many cadet classes did you graduate during your tenure there?
I graduated 10 cadet classes, and for a total of 229 cadets graduated under my command. And that does not include police service aides, lateral hires, rehires, so we're probably looking at around 300.
Now, you retired from the Albuquerque Police Department in 2011. 2011?
Yes, sir.
Now, who is your current employer?
I now work for the National Nuclear Security Administration, which is a branch of the Department of Energy.
And what do you do for this branch of the Department of Energy?
So I am a curriculum designer, and I work with federal agents and subject matter experts in this type of work in policing. And I work with subject matter experts in order to build training curriculums, testing processes, performance-based testing processes. So there is a transfer of knowledge between what the federal agents need out in the field doing their job and also what the agency needs them to comprehend. So I actually build those training programs, pretty boring job, but I do sit and type for about 40 hours a week.
Okay. What academic degrees did you obtain that qualified you to perform the work of instructional design?
So I have an undergraduate degree in education and a master's degree in education and instructional leadership. So that rolled into my ability to be an instructional designer.
And specifically, what is instructional design, if you were to relate it to police work?
Yeah, I think relating it also to the civilian world is probably, anytime you go through a training program, whether it be with your business or any outside training program, that training program is built by an instructional designer. There's a certain amount of transfer of knowledge that we need to come from the organization or the company down to the student, which could be you as an employee. So I build those training programs, and then at the end, there has to be some type of a performance mechanism to make sure there was a transfer of knowledge. That transfer of knowledge protects the agency and also protects the company to say, yes, at the time you took this class, you did understand that. So that's what I do as an instructional designer.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to a different topic, and that is your knowledge of Officer Dominic Perez. When did you first meet Dominic Perez?
I met Dominic the year that he attended the Albuquerque Police Academy. He was a student at the Department of Energy National Training Center's. There was a training program out there, and he was a student. That's when I very first met him, and I was an adjunct instructor working the range and doing firearms type tactics.
Now, what, if anything, caught your attention about Dominic Perez's abilities to serve as a police officer?
So back then, we were definitely actively recruiting for the Albuquerque Police Department. And that active recruitment wasn't necessarily through the recruiting office. It was through family members and friends and people that we run into in the community. So I'm always looking for good people, and to this day still am. And when Dominic came through training, it was obvious that he would make a very good police officer. He was attentive to the training. He was interested in the training. He was a humble student. Some of the students that go through Department of Energy training are simply there to check a box and to get the credential that they're needed in class. And I noticed in Dominic that he was there more to learn, and I love having a good student. And I actively recruited him to the Albuquerque Police Department.
Now, what do you remember about Dominic Perez from the time that you oversaw Officer Perez's Albuquerque Police Department Cadet Academy class?
So I had very little contact with Dominic during the academy because of chain of command issues. I knew he was there. I was happy that he was there, but I had very little contact with him as the director of training.
Now, as commander, you were in charge of the SWAT team, is that correct?
Yes, I was.
Now, what do you remember about Officer Perez's time when you served as Officer Perez's commanding officer on the APD SWAT team?
Great employee. When I took over the SWAT team as a commander, one of my first moves was to bring a sergeant on by the name of Sergeant Jim Fox. And his character and his personality was a fit with mine, and also Dominic's was a fit with mine and with Sergeant Fox's, and we all just kind of had that perspective with service to the community. Dom was just a great employee, always positive when you see him bouncing around. He's not the kind of employee that would run up to you and talk about his issues or his complaints with a job. It's like, man, he's just a happy employee. It just made me happy to see Dom.
Now, I want to turn your attention to your work as the lieutenant and then commander of the training academy and the process that the academy went through to hire an employee. And I wanted to start with the basics. Who sets the requirements that an officer must meet in order to become a certified law enforcement officer in the state of New Mexico?
So that is in New Mexico state statute.
Okay. Now, would you please explain the process by which an applicant for the Albuquerque Police Department, what they go through in order to determine whether they are fit to become a cadet and receive instruction as a police officer?
Okay. Would you like me to start off with the interest card? And
That would be fine.
Okay. So the initial process is to fill out an interest card. You can fill that out online, or you can fill that out in person at the academy at 2nd and Montano. At that time, the number of interest cards we would get to the number of graduates was 1,000 interest cards to one graduate from the police academy. So something that they can be very proud of. So the process is...
Sorry to interrupt. Objection, there are Rule 401, 402 as well.
I'll allow some leeway, but not too much with regard to that objection.
Okay.
So that you initially fill out an interest card, and then we start off with the cheapest testing process possible for the city. And the cheapest thing that we could do first is put you out on a track and see if you can run a mile and a half in a certain amount of time, because we can whittle out a lot of people that way, and it's very inexpensive. Then the next test that you would go into is, and it's not really a test, but you would fill out what we call a PIQ, personal inventory query.
I think there's an objection.
I'll object to just ask, if it's an error, can ask that question be followed up.
Okay, sustain that.
What personality testing must an applicant undergo in order to be accepted as a cadet?
Personality testing, they have to...
Objection, 401, 402.
Sustain.
Okay. Now, going back to the issue about who determines the type of training that is received by an Albuquerque Police Department officer, who makes those decisions?
That is made by the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy Board. It is the same, the requirements for the Albuquerque police officers is the same requirement as it is for any other officer or sheriff in the state of New Mexico.
What role does the Albuquerque Police Department play in determining what type of training their officers receive?
So we are a satellite academy. So the Albuquerque Police Department is a satellite academy in the state of New Mexico. We're a very lucky agency to have our own academy. There's only 9 within the state. So with that, basically the academy is a franchise of what the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy requires. So we have very little leeway. They push down our curriculum to us, and we follow whatever curriculum comes from the state of New Mexico.
Who develops the curriculum for New Mexico law enforcement academies, including the Albuquerque Police Department?
That is the Law Enforcement Academy Board.
And is that training specific to any particular agency?
No, it's not. It's dispersed throughout the state through the satellite academies or the Law Enforcement Academy up in Santa Fe.
Which APD Academy class did Dominic Perez attend?
So that was the 94th Cadet class.
Now, have you had an opportunity to review exhibit, let me hand this to you. I'd like to have you have an opportunity to review what is marked as Exhibit I-1. And once you've had an opportunity to review it, I'd like to ask you some questions about it.
Okay? I'm familiar with it.
What is it?
So this is the layout, curriculum hours of the 94th Cadet class that Dominic attended. So it lists required hours from the state, and it also lists the hours that Albuquerque Police would provide them, and so we use this to make sure that we have a mesh on those hours.
Is it fair to say that Exhibit I-1 is a fair and accurate depiction of the 94th Cadet class curriculum?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to move Officer Perez's Exhibit I-1 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Now, how many hours of training are required by the Law Enforcement Academy, the state's Law Enforcement Academy?
The state's Law Enforcement Academy is, referring to the screen here, the DPS total hours is 800.
And how many hours are required by the Albuquerque Police Department?
At that time, 928.
Why did the Albuquerque Police Department provide 128 more hours in training than was required by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety?
So the New Mexico Department of Public Safety puts out the 800 hours curriculum. Then Albuquerque, specific to our needs as a community and the feedback that we get from our community, is how we build those additional 128 hours, whatever the needs are. So it's very specific to the city of Albuquerque. Likewise, the issues and problems that the citizens of Las Cruces may have is different than the issues or problems that we may have.
Now, I'd like to have you focus on a particular portion of this curriculum, and that is Block 2. Do you see that in front of you?
Yes, I do.
I'd like to ask you some questions about the specific classes. Do you see the section there, Legal Aspects of Deadly Force?
Yes, I do.
What is that class?
Legal aspects of deadly force is a class that couples with the use of force training that a cadet gets. And what we talk about there is a lot of case law. A lot of case law which is not specific to Albuquerque, it's specific to the United States of America. So we talk about legal aspects, whether your use of force can stand up to legal review, and reviewing certain cases helps the cadet relate to whether they can stand up to a legal review.
Now, there's a section here that says civil liability and civil rights. Is that correct?
Yes, there is.
What is that class?
That is a class that explains to the police cadet the ability of a citizen to...
401, 402, and 403.
It explains to a cadet how a citizen can file a civil complaint against a police department, and it also talks about how they can protect themselves from a civil complaint, and also how they and what they can do to protect the agency.
Now, with regard to these two particular classes, how many hours are required by the Department of Public Safety?
So each one of those classes is 3 hours apiece. DPS requires 6 hours, and we taught them 6 hours.
Now, is it fair to say that the curriculum of those two classes is approved by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety?
It is.
Now I'd like to... Now, we're looking at Block 12, Defensive Tactics Handling Arrested Persons. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, there's a section there that says use of force in the reactive control model. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What is that? What is the purpose of that class, and what does it teach?
That takes a cadet remembering where these cadets could come from. At one time, they could have been flipping hamburgers, or they could have been selling cars, or in the military. It takes them from knowing nothing about use of force in 16 hours, teaching them use of force training that is from the state of New Mexico, and we work off of what is called a reactive control model as how we assist them with transfer of knowledge.
Now, how many hours are required by the state?
So the 14 hours is required by the state.
And how many hours of instruction were given by the Albuquerque Police Department to the 94th Cadet class?
That would be 16 hours.
What is your understanding about why the Albuquerque Police Department provided 2 more hours than what was required by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety?
You know, Albuquerque is a very busy city, and as soon as these cadets graduate day one, they will be doing this immediately as soon as they put their uniform on. So we definitely concentrate in that area and give them as much training as we can.
Now, you use the word busy. Moving away from how a police officer would describe the work, how would you explain busy to someone who's not a police officer?
Albuquerque is a busy city to be a police officer in, and not only is it known to us as officers, it's known throughout the nation that if you're a police officer in Albuquerque, you're going to be busy. You're going to answer a lot of calls for service. We have a very high call volume here in Albuquerque. There's an analogy that some police officers can be 20-year police officers with 21 individual years of experience, 1 year at a time, kind of repeating itself. In Albuquerque, when you're a 20-year police officer, like a lot of us here in this room, you've got 20 years of experience with all different types of things. Our call volume is huge, and our manning levels are low. So.
Now, who taught the use of force class and the 94th Cadet class?
That was Bob Johnson, Officer Bob Johnson.
Why was Officer Bob Johnson tasked with the responsibility of teaching this use of force class?
So, and I correct myself, it was Sergeant Bob Johnson. And Sergeant Bob Johnson is a use of force instructor. He got that certificate from the state of New Mexico. It's nothing that Albuquerque can generate. You have to get that certificate from the state of New Mexico. So he was a use of force instructor. And Bob Johnson is probably one of the best use of force instructors anywhere that I have ever seen. So I wanted to retain him to teach our cadets.
The same, that's the last project.
Now, again, who determined the content of the use of force in the reactive control model class?
The state of New Mexico.
Now, there's also another class that's listed there, and that's defensive tactics. Do you see that? No, going back to where we once were.
Okay. Yes.
Let me just pull that up. Do you see that class entitled Defensive Tactics?
Yes, I do.
What is defensive tactics?
Defensive tactics takes the cadets now out of a classroom environment, and we are literally putting on wrestling shoes, mat shoes, and going to the mats. And in defensive tactics, that's when we start introducing things along the lines of positioning. What is the best way to approach a suspect, and from what angle? With positioning, we then start talking about falls. Ultimately, if you're involved in a defensive tactics type confrontation, how do you properly fall to the ground? Break your fall so you don't get injured simply falling over. We then take them to talking about handcuffing, baton, OC, oleoresin capsicum, or mace, and these types of hands-on things. And we also, in defensive tactics, that's where we get into searching procedures, how we search somebody, how we would pat them down correctly, how we would ensure that if you find one weapon, do not stop your pat down, look for a second weapon, look for a third weapon. So these are all the types of things that we teach in defensive tactics.
And how many hours of instruction were required by the New Mexico Department of Public Safety with regard to the class entitled Defensive Tactics?
DPS required 68 hours.
And how many hours did the Albuquerque Police Department provide in terms of instruction on defensive tactics?
70 hours.
I'd like to show you another exhibit, an exhibit that's Officer Perez's Exhibit I. I'd like to have you look at it. And once you've had a chance to look at Exhibit I, I'd like to ask you about it.
Is there a number associated with the I?
No, it's simply I believe.
This is,
Oh. State 59. Is that what it is?
Oh, I'm sorry. I believe it's I-2. I'm sorry, Your Honor. You're right.
I'm familiar with it.
What is it?
This is called the reactive control model. It is the centerpiece of the state of New Mexico's use of force training program.
Is Exhibit I a fair and accurate depiction of the reactive control model as taught by APD to the 94th cadet class?
It is.
At this time, Your Honor, Officer Perez moves Exhibit I-2 into evidence.
Any objection?
We're just looking at it, Your Honor, to figure out where it's different.
The journal promise we can't read part of it, so we get a legible one, I think we have no objection. Sorry. Yeah, that's all right. Sorry.
So, is there any objection now?
No objection, Your Honor.
I-2 is admitted.
What choice does the New Mexico Department of Public Safety give the Albuquerque Police Department regarding the use of the reactive control model?
No choice at all.
No. How is the reactive control model taught to Albuquerque Police Department cadets?
So this is
And I'm
a,
sorry, excuse me, Your Honor, I just want to object on humors. My understanding is the person who taught the class is coming in to testify next.
Objection to the speaking objection, Your Honor.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm happy to approach.
Well, I think I've already heard the objection.
Yes.
If Mr. Robles wishes to present this through this witness, that's his choice, so I
Okay,
will.
thank you, Your Honor.
So it's, again, very brief, as all of these are. How does the Albuquerque Police Department teach this particular reactive control model to its cadets?
so this is part of that 16-hour training block. It is a visual learning tool that the cadets have in front of them as we progress through the class. It's color-coded. It's laid out in a very simple manner. So this is what we would call, in the instructional design world, we would call this a learning tool.
Now, would you please describe the type of setting in which the use of force class is taught?
This is a classroom setting. It is instructed only by a use of force instructor. Nobody else can teach this, and it's instructed at the Albuquerque Police Academy.
Would you please explain the process by which the Albuquerque Police Department takes that classroom learning and then creates different ways, practical ways of officers using what they've learned in the classroom to determine if they actually can do that on the streets?
Okay, so now we start combining experiences of defensive tactics when they're on the mats, that they understand how close or how far away you need to be from a subject, what angle you need to approach them at, how you should always have your gun side away from the subject. Then we talk about now what you've learned in the reactive control model and in use of force, let's put a scenario together. And we'll start off with very, very basic scenarios. Scenarios that really concentrate just on officer presence alone. And I could explain that to you.
Would you please explain how officer presence is taught by the Albuquerque Police Department?
Yes. So officer presence, we're taking young men and women that may have been flipping hamburgers, working at Dion's, whatever around town. They may not hold themselves in a manner to present authority. And literally, we could have gone through these classes already, and we're trying to build up that command presence. Stand up straight, talk clearly, be polite, be attentive to who you're talking to. These are things that we talk about in command presence. And we talk about their voice. And we don't want to be talking like this when we ask for driver's license. We want to talk like, could I please see your driver's license? And it shows authority. So that's a very basic level, but we set that up as a scenario with the cadets.
Would you please explain what a FATS simulator is?
So a FATS simulator, FATS stands for Firearms Training System. We have a dedicated room in the Albuquerque Police Academy that says FATS on the door, Firearms Training Simulator. It is a room that is off limits to the cadets for most of their 6 months training there at the academy. I'll start off with describing the room. So the room, as you initially walk in, has lockers on the left-hand side.
Okay, so would you please explain what a fax simulator is? I think that's what he's doing, so I'm going to overrule the objection.
So you step into the room, and the walls are all painted black, so we can simulate low-light situations. And what is required of the cadet is to stand into the center of the room, and they are issued a firearm that is an exact representation of what they use on patrol, although that firearm runs off of a compressed air system. So they holster up with their firearm, and unfortunately at the time there's a wire that runs back to a computer system, and that's how we run the compressed air, and that's how we register the hits on the movie that they're about to watch or a scenario they're about to watch. But it's not.
So how does that work, that you present a movie and you have the cadet interact with it? Please explain that process.
Okay, so the process is a lot of the cadets, when they go into the FATS room, they believe immediately they're going to be firing their weapon. But remember, what we want to see is command presence walking into that room and standing in front of that video. So we measure that. Then the cadet will start watching a video, a scenario. And usually it's a low-light situation, a low-light scenario, because oftentimes we operate in low-light scenarios. And it starts off with a radio dispatch. And it's something along the lines of, PD DeGrave 315, you have been dispatched to an armed robbery in progress. And so we're watching for a cadet's reaction as they're standing in front of the screen. Because cadets, again, knowing where they came from, they may stand there like this. It's like, okay, cadet, we're going to stop the scenario now. This is information coming over the radio. It's very pertinent to you. You've been dispatched to an armed robbery in progress. This is the time where you should be coming out of your holster and standing and observing. So it's everything from officer presence to the way they draw their firearm, when they draw their firearm.
Now, in this FAT simulation, would you please explain how officers are required to make decisions about whether to use force or not?
Yes, so these scenarios, ultimately we'll talk about a deadly force scenario. There's many other scenarios on there that do not require deadly force. But a deadly force scenario will present itself. An individual will have a firearm. When the individual has a firearm, the cadet needs to be addressing them. Put your weapon down. Put your weapon down now. Now, in the back of the room, there's an instructor running the machine. If we see that the voice commands are good, if we see that the weapon's positioning in the hand is good, we can reward that cadet and show them a successful outcome by the individual dropping the weapon. And the instructor in the back of the room, working with the mouse and the computer, can make that scenario, the guy will drop the weapon. We can also escalate things. So if we see that the cadet is not doing what they should be doing, we can make that go to a deadly force scenario. And let me add a little bit more. It's not necessarily just on the cadet's behavior. Some of these scenarios are set up to where we want to see a deadly force encounter between the citizen and the cadet.
Why is it important to simulate deadly force encounters?
It's very important to simulate it because, first off, what you're going to get is a couple different slow reactions out of the cadets, not shooting in time. And the FATS machine has the ability to give you immediate feedback and say, you just failed that scenario, you just got shot. So then we'll run the scenario again, and we'll explain to them speed, reactionary time. You need to be ahead of this person who has a firearm. So then we start getting to the point where the cadets are actually firing their weapons successfully during this scenario. And it's very interesting where the rounds end up landing. Now the cadets realize, okay, I missed 3 of my rounds and I landed 1. I hit the subject with 1 round. So now we start looking at the big picture in training. Yeah, this is why we're doing this at the range. This is why we explained this to you in use of force. Now let's bring it all together on this FAT scenario. What should you be doing during that deadly force encounter? Coming out of your holster and looking at the front sight. So let's bring everything together. And then eventually, when they graduate, they are getting accurate hits on the firearms simulator, and we're getting them ready for graduation at that time.
Now, I forgot to ask this question when we were discussing the reactive control model. Now, you had mentioned that the reactive control model is a learning tool, is that correct?
It is.
What do you mean by the term learning tool?
A learning tool, so students learn in different manners. There's auditory learners that learn just from hearing. I'm not one of those. There's visual learners, which this helps the visual learner. And there's kinesthetic or touch learners that have to put it all together. So this is just one of the tools that we use to help them understand and look at the behaviors of subjects. And if a behavior of a subject is doing this, you have to, on this reactive control model, you have to be falling down in a straight line to the proper category of your behavior, mirroring the behavior of the citizen.
Now, as a learning tool, does the reactive control model trump the standard operating procedures for the use of force?
No, we look at all of this together.
Okay, would you please explain what role a learning tool has in assessing whether someone has stayed consistent with the use of force SOP or has violated the use of force SOP?
If you are operating within the reactive control model, and we're able to plot those reactions on the reactive control model, you would be within policy of the Albuquerque Police Department.
Now, I'd like to turn to another topic, and that's basic firearms training that's received by officers at the Albuquerque Police Department. I believe that what you're being shown is Block 15 of Basic Firearms Course.
Yes, sir.
Who decides what is taught in firearms training?
Again, just like the reactive control model, this all comes down from the state of New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy.
Now, what leeway does the Albuquerque Police Department have in how it trains firearms?
We do not, at the cadet level, have leeway. We have to give them what the state requires.
Okay. I'm going to show you another block of instruction that's entitled Crisis Management. What is this class entitled Crisis Management?
This enables the cadet to, most of the calls that you deal with as a police officer, you are coming across somebody that is in crisis. As police officers, we get very used to answering 911 calls, but the time that a citizen calls 911, it's probably one of the most traumatic events in their lives. It's going to be an event that they remember forever, and you may forget after a week. So that's a citizen in crisis. It could be somebody that has just lost their job, somebody that's arguing with their spouse, or even somebody at a scene of a traffic accident. How do you talk to somebody that is in crisis?
Okay, who teaches the crisis management classes?
That is our behavioral science division and our department psychologist.
And would you please describe generally the sorts of coursework that's done there, as well as the scenario-based training?
Yes, so the coursework would talk about communication skills, talking with open-ended sentences to solicit a response from a citizen, mirroring and repeating what they have told you so the citizen gets a feel for that you are actually listening to them, paraphrasing what they're saying. And that's more of the classroom-based learning. Then we roll into the scenario-based learning, which is, again, coupling of basic scenarios with role players at the academy to see if they're actually comprehending how to do these things that they were just taught by the department psychologist or the psychologist's team.
What part of this crisis management class focuses on issues in terms of dealing with the mentally ill?
A good majority of that class deals with dealing with the mentally ill.
And would you please explain how role players are used to train officers on how to deal with mentally ill individuals?
Yes. The role players at the time, there was a company called, drawing a blank on it. But it was a group of usually UNM students that are studying that in college, and they would observe behaviors and speech patterns of individuals suffering with mental illness. And they would try to mirror that, the fidgeting of the hands, the rubbing of the arms, the stepping back and forth, the rapid speech, the weird things that you may hear from them. They mirror that to the cadets. And that's what we do in scenario-based training.
Why is it important to have a cadet interact with a role player who's exhibiting sort of behavior that's characteristic of a particular mental illness? Why is that important?
So we want them to get familiar with who they're going to be contacting in the community. And again, it could be 1 minute after they graduate. We come across the mentally ill on a regular basis here in Albuquerque, just as in any other city in the United States. So we want the cadet to be able to properly communicate with them. And
I'd like to. I'm showing you a portion of Block 5, which is patrol procedures and operations. Do you see that?
yes, I do.
Generally speaking, what are patrol procedures and operations?
Generally speaking, we are taking that cadet who knows nothing about the layout of the city, nothing about patrol, and we start off usually with the numbering of the city numbering system. We talk to them about the numbering system starts off at Central and the railroad tracks, and it goes up by the 100 block north, east, southwest, so they can get to where they're going on the 911 calls. And then we start talking to them about patrol techniques, how to properly respond to a call. When you drive to the scene, where do you park? And these are things that are totally new to the cadet. And you can see light bulbs go off in their head. It's very interesting to them. If you are dispatched to an even number address, it would probably behoove you, which could be on the right-hand side of the road traveling north, it would behoove you to park on the same side of the street as that address is coming in, but park maybe 7, 8, 10 houses back. When you park, immediately get out of your patrol car, get away from that. Stand next to a tree, stand on the side of a building, wait for your backup to come. Don't want to talk your head off, but these are the basic types of things that we talk about patrol concepts. Waiting on your backup. Don't do anything alone. Even if the call seems like it's escalating and people need help, wait for your backup.
Now I'd like to ask you about specific classes. There's one entitled Cover Contact. Well, let's go to Cover Contact. I'm sorry, Contact Cover. Would you please explain what is taught in the class entitled Contact Cover?
Contact cover is a fundamental skill that we teach to the cadets from day one at the academy. Whenever you are talking with a citizen, you are the contact officer. The other officer that is with you is the cover officer, should there be any need to use any force. We also set this up in very basic scenarios, and we try to bait the cover cadets into actually talking to the citizen. And I can explain that a little bit more.
Would you please explain why you teach the cadet who's working as a cover officer not to take the bait and begin talking to the subject?
That is one of the 10 deadly errors you could do, is not do your job as the cover officer. Contact does the talking. If you get an ID card from the citizen, you would think that the cover officer is going to run them through NCIC on the radio. That is not true. The contact officer contacts the citizen, gets the ID card, calls into radio. They do all of those tasks because you need a cover officer when you're taking your eyes away from the subject and you're reading the driver's license and you're keying up your radio. The cover officer needs to be covering you. So two very distinct roles, and we enforce that at the academy, in the academy building while they're cadets.
Now, the next class I'd like to ask you about is one entitled Cover Awareness.
Cover awareness, yes. Familiar with it.
What is cover awareness, and what is taught in that class?
We talk about things that, the difference between cover and concealment, from bullets and firearms that are being shot at you, and we give a distinct understanding to get at. So some things are simply concealment, hiding behind bushes, getting behind things that do not stop a round, all the way up to cover, which is getting behind hardened objects, buildings, cinder block walls, things like that, understanding the difference between cover and concealment.
But, you had mentioned earlier in your testimony that 10 deadly errors, and you have a class on that, is that correct?
We do.
What is taught in this class entitled the 10 deadly errors, although I think I know the answer to that question?
Yeah, so the 10 deadly errors, although I do not have them memorized, these are basically errors after studying the deaths of police officers throughout the United States and throughout history. Oftentimes, the death of police officers can be traced back directly to the actions of the officer, mistakes the officer has done. So we talk about those 10 deadly errors. And the 10 deadly errors can start off with not having a proper attitude towards police work, to just checking a box and taking calls and not taking them seriously.
What do you mean by proper attitude?
Some of these calls can seem very routine, and there is no routine call. Every call could escalate all of a sudden. So we want you to have a proper mental attitude, which is, we teach the cadets we are all human. We have things going on at home. You may have just left your house and you had an argument with your spouse. Well, one of the 10 deadly errors is not having your head in the game. You need to be locked on as soon as you log on to that computer and say you're ready for service. That's one of the 10 deadly errors.
Now, you had mentioned, I know that you don't remember them all, but what other errors are taught to law enforcement officers in this class?
Not doing a proper pat down on a subject, not properly handcuffing a subject.
Well, let me stop you on the pat down. Why is a pat down so important to officer safety?
So with a pat down, you need to ensure 100% that that citizen does not have any weapons on them as you're talking to them. So it's very, very important. It's not only important for the initial contact, that is important after the handcuffs go on, to make sure that that person does not have a weapon on them concealed that will then be put into the patrol car of another officer and ultimately going down to MDC. So that's the pat-down procedures.
Now, I stopped you in the middle of your explanation, and I think you had already gone on to the next one, and I interrupted you, so I apologize for that. Would you please explain some of these other 10 deadly errors that are taught in this class?
Yeah, one of them would be tombstone courage. You'll see in officers after they've had a successful 3, 4, 5 years that some of the most dangerous years they could ever have on the police department because their confidence is really high. So with tombstone courage, we do not want them to think that they can handle every call on their own because they've had a successful 5 years. Slow down, listen to the call, listen to what the radio is saying, and wait for backup. So tombstone courage is another one. Not properly maintaining your equipment would be another one. Take your equipment seriously. Understand your firearm. Understand and test your OC that is on your belt. Make sure your handcuffs are operational. Taking care of your equipment.
Now, you had mentioned some of them. Are those the ones that you remember after all these years?
Those are some of the ones I remember, yes.
Now, how would you ensure that the Albuquerque Police Department was meeting the standards that are required of it by the New Mexico Department of Safety?
So again, it's a satellite police academy, so we would submit the schedule of classes to Santa Fe, the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy. We would submit a schedule of the classes. Each one of those classes had to have a certified instructor teaching that class, and we had to have the required 800 hours that the state needed. So we would submit the curriculum prior to the class starting. We would get permission from the state to start the class. Then we would proceed with training, and then we would have to give that proof of successful completion to Santa Fe prior to them being certified.
Would you please explain the process by which the New Mexico Department of Public Safety certifies a cadet from the Albuquerque Police Department to become a police officer?
Yes, so the paperwork that we submit as a satellite academy goes to what is called the Law Enforcement Academy. They certify that all of the hours were completed, and then that completion, the list of those cadets, goes to what is called the Law Enforcement Academy Board. The Law Enforcement Academy Board is ultimately who issues them their certification in the state of New Mexico to be a police officer. So when you graduate out of the Albuquerque Police Academy, you will literally get two certificates. One will be a certificate of graduation from the Albuquerque Police, which I signed Dominic's, and the other one is from Santa Fe.
Okay. And what role does the Albuquerque Police Department play in whether the New Mexico Department of Public Safety ultimately approves the cadet who has graduated from your academy?
So they rely on us for the paperwork, and they have the responsibility to issue it, deny it, revoke it, or suspend it. We don't have anything to do with those certifications.
Now, after an officer graduates from the police academy, there is advanced training, is there not?
There is.
Would you please explain the process by which the Albuquerque Police Department provides its now police officers and detectives training after they've graduated?
So this is called maintenance of effort training, MOE. Sometimes you'll hear it referred as biennium training. In the state of New Mexico, to be a certified police officer, on a 2-year cycle, you have to have 40 hours of advanced continuous training. That training also comes down from the state of New Mexico.
So when you say it comes down from the state of New Mexico, who specifically requires the Albuquerque Police Department to provide the advanced training that you're referencing, the maintenance of effort training?
So that is the Law Enforcement Academy Board will put out the requirements. That then is filtered down through the Law Enforcement Academy and filtered out to all of the satellite academies throughout the state.
Now, what specific areas are covered in this biennium training?
So in those areas, the state, again, it's the state training, they try to hit on subject matter areas that are very important to the citizens throughout the state. Some of those things would be the Safe Pursuit Act, understanding when and when not we should pursue vehicles throughout the city, throughout the state.
Section 401, 402.
I'll do the Assembly Way, but also just not too far,
Okay.
partially sustained.
Would it be fair to say that the New Mexico Department of Public Safety requires biennium training regarding interactions with persons with mental impairments?
Yes, there is.
How does the Albuquerque Police Department provide that biennium training on interactions with persons with mental impairments?
So on the last biennium cycle, it was 4 hours required training, and as the director of training, we would make sure that the student, who is the police officer, comes to the academy and attends a 4-hour advanced training block of dealing with those subjects that suffer from mental illness.
Now, is that separate and apart from the CIT training program?
It is.
Would you please explain the relationship between this advanced biennium training with regards to dealing with persons with mental impairments and the separate coursework in crisis intervention training?
Yes, so you have your initial 40 hours of crisis intervention training as a CIT officer, but not everybody on the department is a CIT officer. So these are, and even if they are, these are refresher skills. These could sometimes deal with case law, Specific to Albuquerque, it could deal with mental health facilities, how to access those facilities, what the workers there at the facilities need. So it's that continuous education, maybe not above the baseline level, but it is continuous from that baseline level.
Now, turning your attention to the selection of instructors for the Albuquerque Police Department, how are instructors, who can become an instructor, and what does an instructor need to do to become an instructor in the state of New Mexico?
So again, as a satellite academy, we follow the rules of the state of New Mexico. And to be a certified instructor, you have to attend well, first off, you have to have 3 years of experience on patrol after graduation to be a police instructor. To become a police instructor, you have to take a 40-hour block to assess your ability to instruct students. And in that class, we talk about learning mechanisms. We talk about how you could properly write curriculum, do a lesson plan, ensure there's testing, how to properly put together a PowerPoint for a student so there's the visual stimulus in the classroom, how to have command over the podium, things like that. So that is the basic 3 years of experience and a 40-hour course is how you can then be a police instructor.
Now, I understand that there's 3 levels of instructors in the state of New Mexico. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What is a general instructor?
So a police general instructor is what I just referred to. That is, it is the lower of the 3 levels of instructors. They could then teach one of these courses that we're pointing to here at the police academy. They could come in and teach for an hour, maybe 2 hours to get their feet wet in the teaching process.
What is a professional lecturer?
A professional lecturer would be somebody that holds an advanced certificate in a certain profession, whether it be an attorney, a doctor, somebody that can come in and teach cadets, and there is a certain category of them to be a professional lecturer. So the cadet in the class can get credit through the state of New Mexico for attending that class.
Now, I understand that there are specialized law enforcement instructors. Is that correct?
There are.
What is a specialized law enforcement instructor?
So now we're getting into the high-risk category areas.
And what do you mean by high risk?
High risk would be your firearms instruction, your rifle instruction, your less lethal munitions instruction, your defensive tactics instructors. Those are the high risk areas.
What does a specialized law enforcement instructor have to do beyond obtaining a general instructor certificate?
So then you have to have 2 additional years of expertise in that subject area. So if you're initially a baseline instructor with your 40-hour block and your 3 years of experience, now we want to see that you've got 2 more additional years and you can go on to things like being a firearms instructor.
And what types of courses does a specialized law enforcement instructor have to pass in order to receive that title?
So that is, again, it is a State of New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy class. We'll use firearms instructor as an example. That class, again, is another 40-hour block specific to teaching a firearm. And it builds off of what you have just learned in your basic class, that you know how to present information clearly to a student. Now we're getting into the particulars of how do you run a firearm, how do you address student needs when they're not passing a qualification, and how you can help that student ultimately be certified with their firearm.
Is it correct to say that Officer Perez successfully completed the Albuquerque Police Department Academy?
Yes, it is.
What does that fact say about whether Officer Perez successfully completed the use of force training provided by the Albuquerque Police Department?
He did complete the training.
What does that graduation say about whether Officer Perez successfully completed firearms training?
He did complete the training.
And what does the fact that Officer Perez graduated from the Albuquerque Police Department say about whether he successfully completed crisis management training?
He did complete the training.
Now that Officer Perez has been an officer, and is a certified law enforcement officer, what can you conclude about whether Officer Perez completed post-basic academy or advanced training?
Yes, he did.
May I confer for a minute, Ron?
Yeah.
Those are my questions. Pass the witness.
I don't need it yet. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I don't have a lot of questions for you. What is a lateral officer? I think you mentioned that earlier on.
At that time, the Albuquerque Police Department was accepting lateral officers from other departments around the state. Knowing that we work off of that same base curriculum, we would accept officers that had experience to the Albuquerque Police Academy to come on and work as an Albuquerque police officer from another agency.
Okay. So was there something known as a lateral class?
There was.
What is a lateral class?
A lateral class looks at the training that they had already and brings them up to speed of the requirements of the Albuquerque Police Department at that time. And oftentimes, what we want to look at is that maintenance of effort training to make sure they are current with all their certifications when they come over.
And what is approximately the length of time on those type of lateral classes?
It could be 2 to 3 weeks, I think, about that time.
Okay. And in 2007, you were in charge of the academy, is that correct?
I was.
Was there a lateral class in 2007?
There was.
And did Keith Sandy successfully complete that lateral class? I'll rephrase. What, if anything, do you know about whether or not Keith Sandy completed that?
I do know he completed the lateral training for the Albuquerque Police Department.
Okay. And can you put up that? Do you see on the very bottom of this exhibit where it says copyright and then it has some names? Do you know a John Boren?
I know those names. I do not know him personally. I do know those names. They're common names that you hear throughout the state of New Mexico.
Okay, so do you know what John Boren did?
Excuse me, Honor, Objection 4142.
Yes, I do know that these three individuals put together this reactive control model. I've read their book. The foreword to their book talks about it being color-coded, talk about it being...
Hearsay.
This is beyond the question.
Okay. Can I have just a moment, Your Honor? I don't have any other questions, but can we approach, Your Honor?
Okay. You may take a recess also.
Thank you.
For those observers, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. You're free to come and go as you are comfortable with. I'm still going to use the white noise because we're...